And suddenly, we heard the voice of a woman crying, which sounded very heartbreaking. This story begins when 4 of my friends and I embarked on a vacation to a campsite, intending to indulge in a few days of camping. As avid campers, we meticulously packed all the necessary equipment, including tents, food, and comfortable bedding for a good night's sleep. To cut a long story short, we arrived in the afternoon on the designated day. Our first task was to locate a suitable spot to set up our tents, considering the considerable number of people already camping there. Eventually, we stumbled upon a spot slightly off to the side, nestled amidst trees and accompanied by a rather dated toilet facility. Although there were cleaner toilets available elsewhere, the one near our chosen spot was functional. Undeterred by the modest facilities, we proceeded to set up camp, and the first night passed without any peculiar incidents. The following day, filled with enthusiasm despite the chilly weather on the mountain slopes, my 3 friends, Paul, James, and Thomas, and I embarked on an exploratory walk. It was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon when we commenced our venture into the forest, known for its picturesque scenery. However, it was during this excursion that peculiar events began to unfold. As we strolled through the forest, engrossed in conversation, my friends and I suddenly realized that one of us was missing. James, who happened to be walking at the rear, had inexplicably vanished. There were no traces or clues left behind, simply an enigmatic disappearance. He hadn't even uttered a word to any of us before vanishing. Filled with apprehension, we initiated a search for James. Paul retraced our steps back to the campsite, while Thomas and I ventured into the thick undergrowth, combing through the dense bushes and trees. Presently, we found ourselves separated, each engaged in the quest for James. I found myself alone, scouring the area amidst the towering trees. Soon enough, I spotted James standing beside a tree, prompting me to approach him. "James!" I called out, relieved to have found him. James turned towards me and smiled upon seeing my face. "Yes," he replied, devoid of any peculiarity. "Why are you alone here?" I inquired, slightly breathless. "Don't worry, I was merely intrigued by a peculiar creature. I pursued it, but it disappeared. This is a forest, James. It's best not to engage in anything peculiar," I retorted, feeling a tinge of annoyance. After reuniting with James, I guided him back to the trail. As I reached the trail, Thomas emerged from the bushes as well. "Thomas, we found James!" I exclaimed, making my way toward Thomas. However, our relief quickly transformed into bewilderment. The James we had just reunited with vanished once again. "This is impossible. James was walking with me. So why has he gone missing again? Don't jest with me. James was with me earlier." Thomas responded with incredulity, his voice escalating. I echoed Thomas's sentiment, saying, "What are you talking about? I found James sitting beneath a large tree just moments ago." "What?" "James was with me, and I discovered him peacefully perched upon a massive rock," Thomas exclaimed, clearly struggling to comprehend the baffling turn of events. "This is strange. It happened at the same time when both of us encountered James. I encountered James under a tree, while Thomas met him on a rock, smoking a cigarette. Just as we thought our encounter had concluded, Paul, who had returned to the tent, rejoined us. He says, "Let's continue on this journey. James is in the tent. Let's go." Paul's words suddenly added to our confusion. The three of us were astonished by the inexplicable events unfolding before us. Paul suggested, "Let's investigate together in the tent to ascertain if it's truly James or a ghost." Eventually, we unanimously decided to return to the tent and see for ourselves whether James was truly present. And something astonishing occurred. Just a few steps into our retreat, a voice called out, "Hey! Wait for me!" Someone shouted. As we turned around, we were taken aback to find James already standing in front of us, now walking back in our direction. We exchanged frightened and surprised glances. "Why did you let me walk alone ahead?" he asked. From that moment onward, things became increasingly peculiar. After Thomas and I met James, Paul also claimed to have seen him in the tent. And now, James appeared from the front, as though he had been walking ahead of us despite being behind us earlier. Filled with curiosity, I promptly questioned James. "James, weren't you seated beneath that massive tree?" "No, I never stopped near that tree," James replied, still bewildered by the bewildering circumstances we had just encountered. To be honest, we were unsure whether this was the real James or an imposter. In the end, we resolved to return to the tent, inadvertently placing James in the lead as we made our way back. Upon reaching the tent, we discovered it to be empty. Paul's sighting had proven untrue. There was no sign of James inside. So, who was it that we had encountered moments ago? Evening fell, and we remained consumed by curiosity over the afternoon's incident. The three of us reached a mutual agreement to momentarily set aside the strange events we had encountered and keep them hidden from James. Our focus shifted to embracing the holiday spirit and having a good time. Together, the four of us engaged in culinary endeavors, sipped coffee, constructed a bonfire, and strummed our guitars. The atmosphere that night exuded warmth, filled with our resounding laughter. As the night wore on, nearing midnight, our jovial banter persisted. Laughter echoed throughout, reminiscent of our carefree hangouts, particularly for Paul, whose son was known for his jokes. During that time, James gathered firewood, intending to build a larger bonfire to combat the biting chill that pervaded the night. However, amidst our uproarious laughter at Paul's jokes, some laughs reverberated more intensely. Despite our hushed silence, the distinct sound reached our ears, sending shivers down our spines due to its eeriness. The laughter suddenly ceased, replaced by the heart-wrenching cries of a woman. Her voice, filled with anguish, resounded softly yet achingly.
Whose voice is that?
Thomas exclaimed in surprise, rendering us speechless, frozen in our places like statues. None of us could identify the source of the voice, whose laughter had merged with ours. The voice had seemed in close proximity, even though the other tents were quite distant. And upon closer scrutiny, no one around us was laughing or crying. After a few seconds, the mysterious sound dissipated. Instinctively, the four of us sought refuge in our tent, trembling with fear as we lay down to rest. Once again, we found ourselves entangled in a bizarre occurrence, as the tent enveloped us in its confines, and the feeble voice of a woman's moaning beseeched for assistance. It was barely audible, almost a whisper.
Help me. Help me.
Accompanied by sorrowful sobs. Silent and petrified, we were gripped by the palpable fear that permeated the air. The cries were short-lived, eventually fading away into oblivion. The following day, we made an early decision to cut our trip short. The unsettling and harrowing experiences we had endured left us with no desire to prolong our stay and risk further distress. Upon returning to the barracks, we recounted our encounters to the local residents. To our astonishment, their narratives revealed the presence of a female climber who had gone missing in that area and remained unaccounted for to this day.